off with any comments from the public for non-agendized items. Do we have any of those? Seeing none, moving on to item 3, corrections to the agenda or consent calendar.
Yes, we will be pulling item 6H from the agenda.
Okay, pulling item 6H.
We've determined that that particular item is not a board action item, but it's a general manager item to consider.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with the corrections, do we have a motion for the adoption of the consent calendar?
So moved. I'll second.
Great. Okay, so no items for number 5. Nothing was brought forward. We're moving to items for board action. Item 6A. This is an item of public hearing, 2025 Urban Water Management Plan and Water Storage Contingency Plan adoption. We are now opening a public hearing. John.
Good afternoon, President Ramsos and fellow directors. I hope you guys are surviving our light pollen year. And so, I'm John Sheridan, Operations Supervisor for the record. I'm here before you today to request the board host a public hearing to receive public comments regarding our 2025 Urban Water Management Plan and Water Shortage Contingency Plan. We have our engineering consultant from Kennedy Jenks, Karina Yap. She is going to provide the board a brief presentation on the both plans. And then at the closure of the public hearing, we are requesting that the board adopt resolution number 3336-26, approving the 2025 Urban Water Management Plan and Water Shortage Contingency Plan. Great. So I will turn it over to Karina.
Hi everyone, I'm Karina. I'm an associate engineer with Kennedy Jenks, and I've been supporting the urban plan development effort both for this update cycle and also back in 2020. So I've been working with you guys for a while. Are my slides supposed to be up here or? I heard you have a packed agenda today, so I'll try to keep this short. Quick agenda. I'm going to talk about the urban plan and what's in it. I'm going to talk about the water shortage contingency plan and what's in that, and then walk through what our timeline is to wrap this up. So kind of the big question, why are we doing a 2025 update? The short answer is that this is required by the California Urban Plan Act. You have to update this every 5 years, and it gives you the opportunity to review your water supply and demand projections over the next 20 to 25 years. And I think the big important thing is that this is how you maintain your eligibility for state grants. So without an adopted up-to-date urban plan, you can't get grant funding. So the urban plan has a couple of key elements. We start with a description of water use broken down by sector. We use DWR standardized use sectors. Then we go through and detail out what your supply sources look like, and then evaluate what your water supplies look like relative to your demand. Basically do a little analysis to see if your supplies are adequate to meet your demand over the next 20 years. And then we document some of your demand management measures that you can use to mitigate demand in times where maybe your supplies don't give you the same buffer that you would like. So in a bit more detail, we start with the current and future demands. These are based off of your population projections, which are developed in alignment with Department of Finance population projections for El Dorado County. We take a look at your metered usage. We demonstrate that your per capita demands are in compliance with SBX 7-7. That's the Senate bill that says that you needed to demonstrate 20% reduction in your per capita demands by 2020. And then this relatively new piece is this water law standard compliance. where you have to demonstrate that your water losses are compliant with these standards that have been set. Then we look at your current and future supplies. So we have to describe like what your groundwater basin looks like, what your current and projected supply availability looks like, and what any future projects that may be in the works, how they will affect your water supplies. The next piece is the supply reliability piece, and that's when we take a look at your water supplies in your normal condition, and then compare your single dry year condition and your multiple dry year condition, and then compare that to your demand projections over the same planning horizon. And then the last kind of key piece of the urban plan is the conservation and demand management measures. There's a handful of required demand management measures that DWR asks for, and then you guys also have some district-specific measures that you guys implement. The next couple slides are pretty number heavy, so I'll speed through what these details are, but these are the demand projections that we presented in the urban plan. These were developed by Carollo in a study that they previously did. And this next table is our table that we use to demonstrate that you were in compliance with SDX 7-7. You met your target in 2020, which you were supposed to do, which is awesome. And this slide shows your progress towards your water loss standard compliance. You have to look at your real and apparent water losses. So real water losses are like physical things like leaks or spills from tanks and stuff like that. Apparent water losses are things like data handling errors, meter inaccuracies, kind of these systematic errors. And based on your data, we found that you guys are in compliance with the real and apparent water loss standards. So these are in a gallons per service connection per day measurement, and so you're at 27.2 GPSCD for your real water losses and 3.1 GPSCD for your apparent, which is great. This table here is your projected supply availability. So this is based off of a couple things. I think the big picture, what we're looking at is we took a look at your current operating wells and what capacity that they are able to provide. And the conclusion we found is that based on the current well that you have online and available, you're going to be able to meet your demands over the planning horizon. And even in your single dry and multiple dry years, I think with supply augmentation as needed, so you can draw on emergency interties with other districts, given that they also have the supply availability in these same conditions, as well as standby wells. And so that's kind of the conclusion we've reached with the supply reliability. And then here's a pretty brief summary of your conservation and demand management measures. So I think kind of the district-specific ones that we wanted to highlight were some of your residential programs. So you have your water efficient appliance rebates, landscape consultation, turf buyback, and a lot of irrigation measures to help kind of mitigate your residential demands. And you have some similar things for your commercial programs as well. And then onto the water shortage contingency plan is kind of the second half of this urban plan piece. And while the urban plan presents kind of this high level, like supply and demand comparison across like a 20-year projection, the water shortage contingency plan is intended to be more like practical, more tactical. It kind of outlines exactly what you can and would do during a shortage. So in this document, what we're required to present is your procedures for conducting your annual water supply and demand assessment, the supply reliability analysis, which is your 5-year drought risk assessment, and then we have to present your water shortage stages and response actions, and then document your communication protocol. So the slide here, it's got a lot on it, but this is basically what your annual supply and demand assessment looks like. This is another DWR requirement that you have to conduct every year, where you take a look at your at your upcoming supply and demand projections for the second half of your current year and the first half of the year after that. So what basically we have documented here is that starting December, January is when you start this process looking through your annual data. February, March, April, May, you're looking and doing that analysis so that you can submit your assessment in June, July. The other piece that's pretty crucial to the water shortage contingency plan is this 5-year drought risk assessment. So this is where we look at your supply and demand projections over the next 5 years. And what we have to do is assume kind of the worst case supply scenario where we assume that you're going to be seeing 5 consecutive dry years, and then we look at how your supply and demand are expected to look over that horizon. And so what we show here is that your supplies are mostly adequate to meet your demands over the next 5 years, assuming multiple dry years. And this includes some augmentation efforts such as connecting to like your emergency interties if these neighboring districts have supplies that are available for you to use, or turning on standby wells, or operating your wells for a longer period of time if need be. This next slide here shows your shortage stages. So these are set in alignment with DWR standard 6 shortage stages. And it shows here what these shortage levels correspond to and what kind of response action may be taken should you see one of these shortages. And then here we have a summary of your communication, monitoring, and reporting requirements, or your protocols. So these are basically some of the guidelines that you may follow if you are experiencing a water shortage and need to communicate that out to your residents, your customers, to neighboring agencies. It also shows some of the monitoring and reporting that is helpful to verify the effectiveness of your conservation programs. Basically, this is just like diligent monitoring of like your metered water usage, your losses, production quantities, and then making sure that your meter installation projects and processes are all complete. So the next steps for the urban plan, the public hearing is this, and then the adoption is the last piece that we need, and that will go into the urban plan as an appendix. And then to wrap this up, all we have to do is submit this to DWR by July 1st. And we'll also be providing a hard copy to the state library and to the city and county. So that is all I have. And I'm not Sachi, I'm Karina, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions from the board?
I just have one. Would you mind go back to the
Sure.
slide where you broke down the water usage between like single family, multifamily?
Sure.
Earlier on the, that one.
Yes.
When you go to 2025 to 2050, it'll go from 2038 to 3,204.
Mm-hmm.
What's resulting in that increase?
I think, so this is from the study that Corolla did where they grew their demand projections in alignment with population growth. So they aligned that with population projections from the Department of Finance. No, total. Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah, I guess we're not going to see that level of increase. Yeah. Regulations and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and not to pick on it, but I just want to make sure we're thinking about that correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
I just had a question because we have a pretty active water source program going on where COS has been very engaged on that. Does that take into account kind of bringing wells online, or is it kind of not really?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
So I guess the question is really, are you taking into account some of the wells that we have planned for going online in the next 5 years? Is that part of this, or is it?
So, yes and no. I guess that would be in the supply availability piece.
Right.
So we do our projections based on the wells that are currently available, and I don't show it here, but there's another table in the urban plan where we present potential future sources of supply, and that's where we report, like, these wells may be, like function may be restored, or these new wells may be happening, and like things like that. So
some of the other augmentation, is that from, like Tahoe Keys, like what are our interconnections with these other water services?
yeah, so those augmentations, we account for those when we write the water shortage contingency plan, and we're looking at, like, they ask us to talk about, like, in the event of a shortage, like, where could you get additional supplies from? How could you provide additional supplies to your residents? And that's where we talk about, like, oh, there are these emergency interties that we could draw from. And so there's a separate table for that.
Gotcha. I imagine it's very comprehensive. Just a quick question in terms of, like, this being a planning document, is there anything in there that's suggesting some additional investment and additional, you know, mitigation measures, things to do?
Like capital
Something
planning
above and
type
beyond what
thing?
we're already doing? Yeah.
So kind of, I guess, big infrastructure investments and, like, capital planning recommendations are not made in this document. I think the intent of the urban plan is kind of to present, like, a evaluation of your supply portfolio and your demands and how those may grow into the future. And I think that more capital investments and stuff like that are things that would be found in, like, a master plan, which this can inform, because this is, like, a great document that talks about, like, growth and what the next 20 years may look like.
I guess when I hear the word plan, I think of, okay, we got that we can do additional conservation measures or, you know, whatever. But, okay, great. Any other questions from the board?
On the communication piece, you had there like text and mail and stuff like that. I wanted to make sure, is that all inclusive of everything that we're providing from the communication standpoint, as far as where things, how communications are sent out for a reduction in capacity, I guess?
Yeah. So those will be, if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think what you're looking for would be in the water shortage contingency plan. So that includes guidelines of, like, if you are experiencing a shortage and need to reach out to your customers and tell them that they need to curb their water use, like, these are the guidelines.
Okay. I just want to make sure, like, I don't know how detailed it is, but, like, I noticed that, like, the Water Smart program was not in there specifically, and that's a tool that we pay for annually.
Okay.
So just want to make sure that that's, like, something that's documented, I guess, to the public, too. So.
This is a public hearing. Are there any public comments, or I guess, like, just to check in the board, is there anything else? No. So I guess I just want to invite anybody from the public to come up and comment on this. Seeing none, I guess I'm going to close the public hearing and look for, you're basically looking for what action you'd like us to consider. Is that your honor? Are you going to read that?
I want to thank Karina for the presentation and great questions by the board. That is correct, Mr. President. We were looking for, let me get back to it here. We are looking for an adoption of resolution number 3336-26, approving the 2025 Urban Water Management Plan and Water Shortage Contingency Plan. Just to summarize quick, you guys asked maybe may we ever use this plan in the future. It's not as critical as other water purveyors, say in Southern California, relying on the state water projects such as, or the Colorado River water. That being said, it is a very critical document. It is obviously required by the legislator, but if you ask Ms. Morris, our grant administrator, she has been very eager to get this document across the finish line. So, again, we are asking for that resolution, and thank you.
I will move to approve. I still see the presentation. There we go. Thank you, Karina. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item 6D, 2026 Pioneer Trail Waterline Project rebid. Trevor.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Trevor Coolidge, Senior Engineer, here to discuss the 2026 Pioneer Trail Waterline Project rebid. So this was an exciting one. Unfortunately, when we originally advertised for bids in March that we received in April, we ended up rejecting all bids due to some irregularities and potential cost impacts to the district. The original low bid for that project was $6.3 million. We went back, redid the project to meet project funding deadlines, prioritize milestones, allow them to extend into a second year. Due to the elimination of that acceleration that was required from the contractor, we saw a reduction in the bid prices. The bid that we're proposing for award today was $5.9 million from Pennsylvania Construction. The second bidding period also received 7 bids, while we received 4 bids during the first bid period. We believe that was both the extension into the second year, contractors having a better awareness of what their project workload was. So some of these contractors came back hungrier, looking for work. And then also knowing what the bids were, I think some contractors saw the bid prices, looked at the linear footage and said, hey, we can do it for that much. With that said, only 2 of the 7 bids received were actually lower than the original bid, low bid. So it wasn't that everyone came down, but a couple contractors did come back more aggressively and were able to reduce their pricing. So what we're looking at today is adopting the final addenda that were issued. That's to provide protections for the district. That's in addition to the original design and project specifications that were adopted by the board. We're looking at waiving minor irregularities in Vince Aguirre's bid. Those minor irregularities were extremely minor in my opinion. They were things like a company that does business as a DBA, and it was as traffic control rather than construction services. So very minor, reflected the parent rather than the child. And then minor irregularities with the addresses of a couple of the listed subcontractors. So nothing beyond that in terms of items that were identified during the bid review. We also did a review of the disadvantaged business enterprise effort. We found that to be in compliance with their grant requirements. That was one of the issues that resulted in the rebid originally when we didn't receive those documents at time of bid. So with that, I'd welcome any questions about this project or the bidding process.
You know, we've talked about this project at length, and so, I mean, through the rebuild exercise and the savings of $400,000, I think is a successful effort and a great job moving that forward.
Any risk of contract modifications or anything down the road? It seems like this particular...
We did ask that not.
Yeah, we did.
Are you saying, are we concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, is there any?
I mean, anytime
any flop going on here?
Yeah, anytime we're burning daylight during the construction season, I'm nervous. So we did implement milestones that reflect what our funding requirements are. That's getting like critical fire hydrants online, getting pipeline online, focusing on the critical backbone elements of the project, reflecting project funding that expires at the end of this calendar year. So we're really pushing on that. So I would say that the funding compliance was one of our biggest concerns. And then secondarily, or of equal importance, was trying to get water out to Myers as we work through potential operational concerns with the Bakersfield well.
And they were pretty confident in offset that there wasn't going to be any massive change orders coming through our way for the additional funding.
The contractor's confident with their bid. We're pushing on them to say, hey, do we need to provide staffing 24 hours a day? How are we going to pull this off? So as we move to finalizing the contract and that's awarded, that's an area of focus along with receiving and improving critical support.
That's good awareness, because when I see a difference like this with the engineer's estimate and then the low bid, right, you don't want someone to obviously come back with change orders and kind of make it up. No, that's good. Like you're going in eyes wide open.
Any other nuance from the ops meeting?
Oh, no.
But it was the first thing.
Yeah. Okay. Both of us were like, oh, that's a large variation from our estimate to what was proposed. So, yeah.
Great. Are there any other comments from the board or questions from the board? Are there any comments or questions from our public? Seeing none, what would you like us to consider, Trevor?
I request that the board adopt addenda to the 2026 Pioneer Trail Waterline Project, rebid design plans and specifications pursuant to Government Code 830.6. Secondly, find minor irregularities in the bid from Vince Aguirre Construction Incorporated to be immaterial and waive immaterial irregularities. And finally, award the contract for the 2026 Pioneer Trail Waterline Project rebid to the lowest responsible bidder, Vince Aguirre Construction, in the amount of $5,900,000.
So moved.
Thank you, Trevor.
He's on stage.
He has the next one too, Shane.
Oh. Repeat them.
There you go.
Okay, moving on to item 60. Sorry, Trevor.
He has a kindergarten preschool graduation, he said he will be out of the door by 2:30.
Okay. It's important to get a warrant. Okay,
in the
item
parking.
60, BU Pump Station Rehabilitation Project.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Trevor Phillips, Senior Engineer again, here to discuss the BU Pump Station Rehabilitation Project. What we're looking at is a fairly substantial amendment for Water Systems Consultants, WSC, who's the designer on this project. I want to talk a little bit about what's happened to date, what was spent to date, and where it's at and where we're going. So the BG pump station is one of our big five pump stations. That's one of the 5 primary pump stations that sends wastewater directly to the plant for treatment. So those are usually considered our most significant ones. We've recently done upgrades and improvements at Tahoe and Upper Truckee pump stations. The issue is planned to be then essentially Johnson. So BU is unique and it operates in tandem with Johnson, but not necessarily in coordination, one of the other big 5 pump stations, through 2 force streams that come back to the plant. And so that's required significant hydraulic modeling, significant testing in the field, and a lot of work that isn't necessarily design work, trying to optimize how the station is sized, how it functions, how it can be most efficient, and also what Johnson looks like in the long run. So because of that, we've experienced some increased costs in comparison to what you'd normally see for a pump station rehab. The other element of this project is we are up against a deadline with the state revolving fund. We have an awarded loan. That loan is ready for us to go to construction, and so we're pushing hard to get out to construct. With that said, we did go into a holding pattern working with McDonald's, which surrounds our property. They're really seeking a construction drive-through, and as you may or may not be aware, there's a pretty strong cap on those in the Tahoe Basin and within California as well. So while McDonald's worked through that exercise that was not fruitful, we waited for them because they want to do that in coordination. We're now at a point where we really need to move forward. So a big part of this consultant contract includes property services or property acquisition services. That's in accordance with the Uniform Relocation Act, which is a federal guidance for how we as a public agency acquire easements, acquire property, or impact property owners. We want to make sure everything's fair. That's required as far as part of our federal funding compliance. So that's about 40,000 of this, about an eighth of it. Another big component is based on these other big 5 rehab efforts, we learned a lot about how our controls operate and what our operators like. So even though we're well into design, we're making changes to make sure this pump station reflects what our operators want for the next 50 years. So about another third of this contract, or about 80,000, is working on designs, finalizing VFDs, making sure these controls are reliable, consistent with what our operators want to see. Another major part of it is looking at groundwater dewatering. That's one of the plans that's included in this. That's for future wet well construction. Wet wells are one of the biggest, riskiest things as part of a construction contract. We think that's money well spent because it reduces risk for our contractors, which then reduces our construction costs and also reduces potential challenges during construction. So lastly, this is the district's original office. It's really neat. If you walk around it, you'll see the original public utilities or the letters that are left stuck in the wall. It's a 70, 75-year-old station, so there's a lot of money in here for structural design. It currently doesn't have an HVAC system. It will get heating and ventilation within this enclosed building, and it will also have a hazardous materials inventory done because we're pretty sure the floor tiles are asbestos. We're not sure what else we're going to find as we get into it. So it's a mixed bag of what's in here. I understand it's a bit of money, but that's where we're at, that's where we're going. And again, we're pushing forward to maintain this low interest loan to get this project built, out to bid and built over summer 27 and potentially 28.
Comments? Board? It is a big increase, and I understand the SRF loan timing, but it just puts us as a board in an awkward position with a project that hasn't advanced in a timely manner. So hopefully, we can going forward and proceeding, but I think it's necessary to provide good rationale justification. And good luck, McDonald's, getting the drive-through.
Not Jack in the Box.
Yeah, I guess I would mirror that as well. I guess for us, just trying to anticipate some of these things, these change orders, like better in the future. It sounds like we're still potentially going to do some change orders potentially with discovery of asbestos or some other things that might pop up along the way. But I don't think we're seeing the end of this one. It seems like we might be coming back at us on this one.
At the same time, we are going through ongoing value engineering. We're trying to figure out what we can reuse, what we can't. Are there ways to simplify the piping that's out there? Could we potentially even reconfigure things to disengage from McDonald's and stay on our own parcels? So in the background, we are trying to value engineer as much as we can.
Curious how the discussion was at all.
Yeah, it was pretty similar. Yeah. Similar questions. So, yeah.
Similar thoughts, I don't need to repeat everybody's, but yeah.
Okay, are there any questions or comments from the public on this item? Seeing none, what would you like us to consider?
I request that the board approve the additional scope of work for Water Systems Consulting Incorporated to complete design services for the Bijou Pump Station Rehabilitation Project and authorize the general manager to execute Amendment B to Task Order Number 2 with Water Systems Consulting Incorporated in the amount of $381,697.
So moved.
Thank you.
Okay.
Graduation.
Yeah.
Important stuff. Item 6D, acquisition of 936 Tanglewood Drive. Mark.
Well, I brought my water this morning. You know that if I have my water, I mean, yeah, be talking a lot. I'll try to keep it short though. So yeah, this first item that I have today, Mark P. Wolf, Water Resources Manager. This first item is for acquisition of 936 Tanglewood Drive in the city of South Lake Tahoe. This is a very strategically located parcel for us because it is adjacent to our existing parcel at 942 Tanglewood Drive. As we move on to the development of the Tanglewood Well project, this is going to help us increase the footprint of that well site from about 6,500 square feet, which is very small and difficult to conduct maintenance or necessary modifications on, to about 19,000 square feet. And so that's going to help us with our well maintenance, pump pulls, staging. It's going to make us adaptable into the future for potential well redrills 30 to 50 years down the road, and also potential wellhead treatment if needed. And so, yeah, very strategic parcel for us. We met 2 times in closed session to talk about terms and conditions for an offer with the seller, and we are currently in escrow for a price of $425,000 on the parcel. And so what I'm asking for today is to authorize the general manager to release all the contingencies on that offer so that we can close on that parcel. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have.
Questions from the board, comments from the board? I know we've talked about this in the past.
I appreciate you trying to go to 375.
Yeah, we tried.
we had no leverage, I mean, 0, and so, but I do appreciate the effort. And to your point, we've discussed this numerous times, so good moving forward.
Yeah, I think the rationale for the necessary size going forward makes me feel like this is a very important acquisition, so I'm comfortable moving forward.
I guess just one question: do the neighbors know kind of what's going on in terms of the land acquisition potential?
Yeah, so we did have to do a change of use permit from TRPA for the existing parcel because it's going from residential to public service facility. And we actually had a public hearing last week for that, and we got a conditional approval for that. We got no public comments despite 300 neighbors being notified. And so, yeah, they're used to it. You know, we did the test hole there last year. In terms of the additional parcel, we plan to address this through a parcel consolidation. And so we're hoping that there won't be additional, like we won't need a second public use facility permit for that because it'll eventually become part of the same parcel. And so we're going to get right to work on that as soon as we close on this.
What happened to the units of use? That wasn't included, so we retained that?
We didn't, no, so yeah, we're, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? What would you like us to consider, Mark?
Approved purchase of 936 Tanglewood Drive, El Dorado County, APN 31-313-017 in the amount of $425,000 and authorize the general manager to execute the associated real estate transaction documents.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, moving on to 6E, Sunset and Tanglewood Well Drilling Project.
Again, Mark Silas, Water Resources Manager. So this item is the construction contract for the Sunset and Tanglewood Well Drilling Project. And so this project will include drilling, installation, and testing of the Sunset Replacement Well. It'll also include destruction of Tanglewood Well and drilling, installation, and testing of Tanglewood Well. Important to note that this is just the installation of the well itself and the testing, and that a future project would address the control building in the well house. And so, yeah, we advertised this project on Planet Bids on May 7th, 2026. We had a mandatory pre-bid on May 27th with 6 prime contractors in attendance. We opened bids on June 8th, 2026 at 2 p.m. We received 3 bids. They range from $2.269 million to $2.926 million. It's notable to mention that the engineer's estimate for this project was $1.8 million, so we were quite high above the engineer's estimate. The main thing driving that is that the cost of stainless steel has actually, or the raw materials for stainless steel have doubled due to tariffs. And so we're looking at now about $500 per foot of stainless steel well screening casing. So that's $500,000 of steel on the ground that's going to be associated with this project. And so that was the main thing driving that. We did include a summary of the bid along with staff findings in the attached memo. Zim Industries was the low bid. They had 4 minor contractual irregularities, but we were able to verify all of the information. And we have a long working relationship with Zim. They actually are responsible for drilling most of our modern wells in our system. So just to name a few: Bayview Well, South Upper Truckee, number 3, Elks Club, number 2, Glenwood, number 5, Valhalla. And so, yeah, they've done good work for us drilling these wells, and they are well respected in the industry. In addition to that, our hydrogeological consultant that we've been using on the project has a good working relationship with them. And so we're expecting this project to go off without a hitch. And so if approved, drilling and well construction is scheduled to begin mid-July 2026, next month. And so happy to answer any questions.
Just curiosity really is like, so some of the test well drilling that was done there, is that going to be taken advantage of for the final installation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that the information that we got in the Tanglewood test well is going to be extremely critical to the final design of that well.
Will we use that same, I guess?
We don't need to use the same method anymore.
Same, I guess, hole in there?
So we were considering that, and that was actually the initial plan because that parcel was so small that we really didn't have space to put in multiple wells on it. But now with the acquisition of the new parcel, we have space to move. So The current plan is actually to destroy that existing long screen test well, and it's commonly done. You basically grout the well, dig it below grade, and then cover it and compact it. And so you won't know that that well existed. But it is going to help us a lot during our pumping tests for the project because it's really useful to have a monitoring well nearby while you're doing that. So, yeah.
So is it going to be potentially more set back from the adjacent parcel that has a house on it? Is that kind of what I'm understanding? Like
Yeah.
have more latitude to kind of move it away?
Yeah, so it does give us flexibility where we move it. Most of our siting is actually based on requirements of the California Water Code, though. Like you have to have certain setbacks from sewer and laterals and things like that. And yeah, most of what we're considering is like maintenance access and looking at a preliminary well house layout to make sure that we have it in like the best spot on the parcel.
And so we haven't really quite got into the well house design yet.
Not the well house design, but I do have like a standard well house design that I use just for siting purposes, and it's based on our Bayview well. And so I basically move Bayview well building around on the site and determine where the best spot's going to be for maintenance access.
So aesthetically, it kind of fits in the neighborhood, looks kind of like a house kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Are there any questions or comments from the public on this item? Seeing none, what would you like us to consider?
Find minor irregularities in the bid from Zim Industries to be immaterial and waive minor irregularities, and award the project to the lowest responsible bidder, Zim Industries, in the amount of $2,268,900.
Thank you, Mark. And on item 6F, Sunset and Tanglewood Well Drilling Project, Mark Selos.
Thank you, Mark Selos, Water Resources Manager. Let the record be noted in case anybody scrolls through this on YouTube.
I think we all showed up today for
yeah, so this next request is related to the same project, the Sunset and Tanglewood Well Drilling Project. And so when you're doing well drilling, it's really important that you have 24-hour on-site 24-hour during drilling, on-site hydrogeological support and construction management. And so the on-site hydrogeologist is really the eyes and ears for the district for the project. They're providing construction management, but they're also looking at the cuttings as they come out of the well. They're correlating that to depths based on the transit time that it takes to pump them up. They're taking samples, they're characterizing their lithology, running sieve analysis, and then they're collecting really key data that's going to help us design the well so that we don't get sand and so that we have the most productive well with the best water quality possible. And so, yeah, very important to have them. Every single job we've ever done here, we've had an on-site hydrogeologist, every well job. And so, yeah, it's an important part of the process. We've been working through the design process with Montgomery & Associates. They've helped us put together preliminary design reports for these well replacements. Of course, those are only preliminary because we don't really know what we're going to get until we start drilling. But they've helped us put those together as well as the technical specifications for the driller. And so it's important, just like engineering services during construction, that you use the same consultant into the drilling process so that you can have continuity with that scope of work. We don't want to hand somebody else's scope of work off to a different consultant. And so, yes, I kind of mentioned what the specific tasks would be, but it would include all of your standard ESTC tasks like construction meetings, submittal and RFI review, also final well designs, and then the on-site inspection and specialty inspection and construction management that I mentioned. And the total cost for both well sites is not to exceed $328,645, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm just curious, like the total cost of this particular well going in the ground, what is that estimated at?
For Tanglewood, or?
Yeah, for Tanglewood.
Yeah, so
Soup to nuts, all of it.
pulling it out on here. So including the previous test well that we did,
Yeah.
and then including the well house,
Yeah.
I would put it like in the range of $5 million. Yeah.
Any questions or comments? Any questions or comments from the public? What would you like us to consider?
Approve the scope of work from Montgomery and Associates to provide hydrogeological support, specialty inspection services, and construction management services for the Sunset and Tanglewood Well project, and authorize the general manager to execute task order number 4 with Montgomery and Associates in the amount of $328,645.
I'll second. What did you move in, sorry?
I'll motion.
Oh, sorry. I'll second.
And so you're going to be online with this particular contractor as well, kind of overseeing his oversight.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. And so we do have a interim inspector, or not interim, but a kind of backup inspector scheduled to the job who will be inspecting our inspector. And then I'll be inspecting the inspector who's inspecting the inspector.
On 6G, Indian Creek Reservoir Nutrient Management Project, Mark Selos.
Mark Selos, Water Resources Manager. So yeah, this is related to our Indian Creek Reservoir total maximum daily load program. So as you know, that reservoir has a total maximum daily load for phosphorus due to the excessive algae growth that it experiences. We had previously installed what's called a hypolimnetic oxygenation system in the reservoir, which basically adds pure oxygen, dissolved oxygen to the bottom of the reservoir. That was meant to decrease the phosphorus coming out of the sediment. We found after years of monitoring that was not having the anticipated effect, and we were still out of compliance with our water quality targets in that reservoir. We also, in 2023, had an electrical failure there, and have determined that in order to operate our compressor necessary at that station, we would need a very expensive and involved electrical upgrade at a remote rural site. So it's become prohibitively expensive, and due to its ineffectiveness, we kind of took this as a time to reevaluate how we're addressing this problem. And so in 2025, the district partnered with Stillwater Sciences and UC Merced, and we did a bench scale laboratory experiment where they collected sediment samples from the bottom of the reservoir at several sites, and they treated them with different sediment amendments. And these are all kind of like industry standard products that are designed to decrease phosphorus coming out of the sediment. We found that ACH, or aluminum chlorohydrate, is the preferred amendment, and that's due to its effectiveness in our experiments. Its cost effectiveness, it's by far the cheapest, and its low risk of adverse impacts. And so building on this work, the district was actually able to secure a $100,000 grant from the Bureau of Land Management under their Aquatic Resource Management Program. And that grant was to fund a scope of work that was specified by us, and that includes installation of a real-time monitoring station in the reservoir and a public-facing dashboard that would allow the public to see what the water quality is at the reservoir in real time. It also includes preparation of monitoring and chemical application plans, so plans for applying the amendment, but also for monitoring its effectiveness and for monitoring potential adverse effects to make sure that we're not having any. And then interim reporting required by the grant, and permitting as well. There's going to be some permitting involved. And so this is just a planning phase of the project. In future phases, we're looking to acquire additional funding so that we can implement these treatment and monitoring plans. And so we advertised a request for proposals on April 30th, 2026, and we opened submissions on May 29th, 2026. We received one proposal from Stillwater Sciences. It was favorably reviewed by district engineering and grants team, and we had an interview with them on June 10th. And so we're going to recommend awarding the contract to Stillwater Sciences, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So just a quick question on the source of the phosphorus. So it's basically remnant from back in the day when we were basically moving our treated effluent.
It is suspected that a portion of it is due to that. So like in the TMDA, the total maximum daily load staff report that Lahontan released in the early 2000s, they had like a source analysis, and they kind of tried to partition it between like internal loading, what you call it, so coming out of the sediment, and external loading, so coming from the creek. And they determined that like 60% or so was from that internal load. How much of that is actually due to the previous use of the reservoir is uncertain. I mean, there's phosphorus in the soil everywhere. So, but yeah, I would say that this reservoir isn't very different in terms of chemistry than any other California reservoir. And so, yeah, like, yeah, any reservoir that's in a warm environment that's going to stratify is going to have nutrient issues, and you see this all over the state. Like, everyone knows about harmful algal blooms, and yeah. But yeah, it just so happens that we previously used it as a treated wastewater reservoir.
Thanks for that clarification. I do appreciate going after the grant funding and then also providing some real-time information to the public. I think that's a great feature that we can offer, and we will see what the final proposal is and then what we have to do about it, but I think that's great.
Do we know if there might be sources of grant funding for doing the actual implementation?
So we actually, our award from BLM, it does include implementation of the actual ACH, but that portion of it is unfunded. But they said that they want to fund it as funding becomes available. So we're hoping that we can get money from that pool if it's available. If not, yeah, there's a number of different grants that our grants department has been looking at. Like, there's non-point source pollution grants, there's emerging contaminant grants, things like that they've been researching. And so yeah, we're definitely going to keep that in mind and pursue those diligently.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, what would you like us to consider?
Approve the scope of work from Stillwater Sciences to provide planning, permitting, and monitoring services for the Indian Creek Reservoir Nutrient Management Project, and authorize the general manager to execute task order number 3 with Stillwater Sciences in the amount of $160,823.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item 7, standing in ad hoc committees and liaison reports. Nick Exline, want to start us off? Nothing?
Joel and I both attended, and Joel's going to report.
So most of the stuff that we talked about on the agenda was the bulk of the meeting. We did talk about the findings from Bakersfield. There's going to be a bottom grout on that well to address, hopefully, the issues happening out there. There's also some discussion around the Heather Track water system and some potentials for the future with that. More to come. That's a kind of a collaboration between us and Lukens. And hopefully some grant, it's kind of grant funding. It's like state funding to support that migration potential. So I won't talk about the sewer lateral because I believe we're going to have a presentation on that and more to come on that one. There was also a meeting with Paul and Adrian and Chris and I think one other person with Sam Booth from the Alpine County, the new CAO. So gave him a tour of the operations down there, kind of showed him around. That was overall very successful. They finished up with the minor repairs for the ditch, and it was opened as expected, so everything was good there. And then just lightly touched on the fleet transition plan and just, supporting staff that we're not going to do anything to halt funding for projects, but we would like to see, obviously, more as a board on that front. So I don't know if you have anything else to add to that one, Kelly.
The El Dorado Water Agency met and we approved our budget, and included in that approval and a subsequent action, there's a cost share with SDPUD. So El Dorado Water Agency is co-funding some of the GSA work that I know we've been working with them on quite a bit, and even going so far as like managing some of the contracting, so again, freeing up some of our staff resources. especially Mark, as you saw, he just went through 4 items, no shortage of stuff. So that is a great budding relationship with El Dorado Water Agency that, you know, hopefully can result in more of those tax dollars coming back to the Tahoe Basin.
Great. Anything on the executive committee?
So we'll be there for the session.
Closed session, gotcha, okay. All right, moving on to item 8, board member reports. I didn't have anything to report. I'm a proud father of a graduate from the University of Oregon, so I just, a big report. All right, moving on to 9A, sewer lateral air test, Brian Lee.
Good afternoon, Brian Lee, Customer Service Manager. Today I wanted to talk to the board about the district's sewer lateral air testing program and a potential expansion to the program that we're considering. We did talk about this, as Joel said, at the last Ops Committee meeting with him and Kelly, and their recommendation was that we move forward in presenting what we're looking at to the full board. So to give you a little bit of background on what the district's current air testing program is, it's been in place for a long time. The administrative code, as you know, states that the customers own the sewer laterals from their home to the main line in the street. So what we call the upper lateral from the home to the property edge, and then the lower lateral in the street from the property edge to the main line is a customer-owned asset. To ensure the integrity of those laterals, the district has for a long time required that they be air tested anytime a new lateral is installed, or if a customer takes out a permit for doing some work and buys capacity to expand sewer use at their property, we require that the lateral be tested. The way that the air test works is that the customer will hire a plumber to come and basically plug the lateral and then fill it up with air, and our inspectors will witness that test to ensure that it's not leaking. So it shows us that the lateral is installed correctly, that there's no defects in it that are causing it to leak, or to take water in. So up until this point, like I said, that's just been done primarily for new builds and remodels. And once an air test is passed, we do certify that test for 10 years. So you only have to do it every 10 years at most. So the change that we're considering making to the program is to expand the requirements of testing to include any time a property transfers ownership. The reason for this is that as you know, the district system is kind of aging out. So are these private laterals. So many customers are not aware that this is a liability that they own. They don't know that this asset belongs to them, and they're kind of reaching their end of life. So most of these were installed in the 1960s and 70s, so they're over 50 years old. 50 years is about the expected useful lifespan for one of these sewer laterals. Primarily they're made out of clay. Sometimes they're made out of asbestos cement. So what we wanted to do is really just talk to the board about this recommendation and the reasons for it, to see if we have your support in moving forward and kind of planning this program. It will be an involved thing. There are a lot of things to work out, but I wanted to let you know that, you know, it will have some cost impacts to the customers. It may be unpopular, but we do believe that in the long term that this is in the interest of the district and its customers. So 10 years ago or so, the district commissioned a study from Carollo to look at our sewer collection system and try to determine where the sources of I&I, or inflow and infiltration, are coming from. So they installed some flow monitors throughout the system, wrote up a report, and their finding was that a large amount of the I&I that we're treating here at the plant is coming from aging sewer laterals. So not necessarily the district system, but either laterals that are missing cleanouts or that they're just in bad shape and they're taking on water. So requiring this more frequent air testing is a good way to kind of chip away at this problem. What we're concerned about primarily is that as all of these laterals were kind of installed over a relatively brief span of time, maybe 2 decades, they're all reaching their end of life at the same time, and we're starting to see failures in a way that we haven't in the past. So the concern is really, you know, you have a lot of customers who are not aware that they have this liability. Sewer laterals reaching the end of its life. To give you an idea of some of the costs, in order to replace a sewer lateral, it costs about $20,000 to $30,000 is what we're hearing from the contractors. In some cases, you may be able to line it. That's about $10,000 to $15,000. Sometimes you can do some spot repairs and just replace a portion of the pipe that can get you by, but At the end of the day, these costs are coming to the customers, kind of whether they're aware of it or not. So what we're trying to do is get ahead of that and avoid, having them fail en masse. I think what would happen if they did is that our regulators very likely would require that the districts would make these repairs. If the customer has a failed lateral and they're not able to afford it, what has happened in the past is that we'll get a call from one of the regulators saying that we need to go out and repair this thing, and that can be kind of messy on, how the district handles the financing on that. Some districts I've seen have actually done that work with a financing agreement where they collect it with interest over time. It can be kind of challenging to track that. It also takes time away from our underground sewer crew and the work that they're doing. So that's really our main concern. And so this idea came from some of the agencies around the lake who are already doing this. So Tahoe City PUD, North Tahoe PUD, Donner Summit PUD around the lake have had this requirement in place for quite some time. Some of them, I think, did this back in the 90s, but some of them more recently. It's also becoming more popular around the state. So in one of the CSDA communities that we're part of, this is California Special Districts Association, there was a recent thread with different agencies exploring this same option, asking questions about, implementing this policy and what kinds of feedback they got. So quite a few of them actually chimed in and said that they already have this policy. So places kind of all over the state, but Las Colinas Valley District, who we've worked with in the past, Santa Cruz Sanitation. So some of the bigger agencies have also required this. Some of the pros of requiring this at the ownership change is that it's a time when there's money available in the escrow process and motivation to make these repairs in order to get that sale through. Last year, we had 670 ownership changes in the district service area. So it really would be an impactful way to kind of get these repairs made, get the lines assessed, and cut down slowly on the number of repairs that we need to make in the system on the private side. Some of the challenges related to this was, like I said, the cost to the customers. There will be some smaller costs. Cost of an air test is typically around $800. We have a couple contractors in town and plumbers who are performing these, but one of them is doing the vast majority. About 90% of the air tests we witness is done by one plumber right now. I imagine if we implement this, there may be new people coming into that market, which could drive down the costs. The other feedback that we got from the CSDA thread and in talking to our partners on the other side of the lake was that when they rolled out this change, that it was not popular. It's another kind of burden on the customers in some ways. But where they all mentioned that one of the groups that they really heard from loudly on this was the realtor community. And so I expect that we will hear from them as well. And our plan is that if the board is in support of us moving forward with this, we really want to take some time to think through it. There's some internal questions we need to talk through on how the program will work. But we will focus on making a lot of proactive outreach efforts to talk to the realtors in particular, and different kind of communities and builders and people who we're working with. The good thing is that the local title companies we work with are familiar with this from the north side of the lake, so they're asking us all the time if this is a requirement that we have. So I think we have some workflows in place, some things that we'll need to consider. One other thing that we'll need to consider is the impact to our inspections department. We need to look at basically if we're doing 500 or so additional inspections a year, what impact that will have on our staff time. It will be significant. So we've talked about some other ideas on how to kind of mitigate that. One of them is to have an authorized list of plumbers who maybe can self-certify these tests. Yeah, that we'll train them on what the requirements are. This is an option because otherwise it will be a significant impact on our staff time. Those are really the reasons that we're looking at it, is that I think it will be effective in getting these laterals repaired and replaced without, having the customers really get to that point where these things completely fail and you have to replace it immediately. But we're aware that, anytime we have a program change that has costs for the customers, that's something that we want to consider carefully. In this case, I just think it's a necessary change. It also will make a big difference on cutting down on the I&I that comes into the plant. So the cost of treating that is substantial, especially during storm events, and that cost is borne by all of the district's customers. So there's some savings for us there, but it's really just, we can be helpful, and this is not really our asset, but we can be helpful in proactively helping customers to maintain these things before we see large amounts of failures, and that's really the goal. Another thing that will come out of it, I think, is that it'll raise awareness that these assets are out there, and that, you know, customers may want to have the sewer lateral air tested, even if they're not selling at home, just to know what they're looking at. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board has.
Just one more quick piece of data. Based on the number of properties that sold last year, we would be able to get about 5% annually, the sewer laterals tested and repaired or replaced if necessary.
I guess the question is a couple of questions. One's more technical. When we do the air test, they go into that lower part of the lateral to plug that and then air test the entirety of the lateral from the upper and the lower?
Yeah, what we typically have them do is air test the two sections separately. So they'll do the upper lateral and then the lower lateral. So you really can isolate, where the issue is.
And then I guess the other question is, as a property is transferred, are there any other STPUD costs that we're already levying on our customer? This would be something new and unique?
It would be a new requirement. We don't levy any costs, but we do show up when title companies run a title search. The district shows up as a potential lien holder, so they always already reach out to us, and what we give them is the amount owing on the account. They'll prorate between the buyer and the seller. So this would really, we'd work closely with the title companies to let them know when they reach out for what they call that demand. We will let them know that, hey, there's $200 owing, and this property requires an air test. But like I said, right now it's good for 10 years. This is something we'll have to look at and potentially adjust if these things start getting worse and failing more. But right now, that would be the way that we accomplish this, is by working with the title companies, but there's no other real costs associated with owner change, no new account setup fees or anything like that.
Can I ask a question? So would this be just like a disclosure, or I'm just trying to think through, like, how are some of these other programs structured? Do they actually require not only the testing, but then the actually repair prior to transfer, or is that a negotiating point for the seller? I'm just trying to run this through the scenario.
It's a good question, and it came up in our discussions on how to actually make this work. So different agencies do it differently, but how they typically do this is they'll pass an ordinance requiring that this be done, and then it's backed up by the section of the code that basically allows us to disconnect service if you don't comply with it. But what they'll do, so the question of whether or not you have to replace it before it sells, if there's something wrong with it, I've seen some agencies that actually do require that. Basically, they will not set up a new account until it passes an air test. But we've also seen some agencies, like we were talking to Tahoe City specifically about how do you handle this in the winter, right? If there's 8 feet of snow on the ground, you make them do the air test, and they said yes. So they require the air test, even if they have to dig that thing up. But their answer to the question is, let's say it's in the middle of the winter, you do the air test, it fails, it looks like there's structural need for an actual new pipe or something. They take a deposit, so they require the customer get a quote for what it's going to cost to repair it, and then somebody has to write them a check, and they keep it as a deposit for that amount, and then release it once the repairs are made. I don't know that that's something that I would recommend. We'd have to consider it. The other thing you could do is basically just make it a contingency of the sale and let the escrow company hold money in escrow if that's how they want to fund those future repairs. And then again, if the repairs are not made, we could enforce it by just saying, this connection is not compliant with our code, and we could go through the process of, disconnecting it. It's tricky though. This is
it just seems like a pretty big can of worms administratively, not just the testing and everything, right? Is how it's actually administered and how it relates to the real estate transaction. So I think there's a lot more conversation to be had on this. I'm kind of on the fence here. I get the risk that some of these aging laterals have, but I also look at it, from a public standpoint, basically holding up real estate transactions, because if it had to get fixed, all the way down through requiring fixing it, like that's significant from a time standpoint. It could be, and cost standpoint. So, I think it's a pretty big deal that we should have a lot of discussion on.
Yeah. I was going to just say, like, that's really the next step is that if the board supported us, we just wanted to talk to you before we invest a lot of time into really looking at planning this out and developing those workflows. But that's what we're looking for. If you're interested in us moving forward with that, then we'll have those conversations and see more how other people are doing it. It really, the escrow requirement, I think, helps because there's money available. So that's why I think most people try to tie it to a property sale. It's just that there's money and motivation to do it. Another way to do it would be to just require that everybody test their laterals once every 10 years or something like that. But you're in that same place on, like, if one fails, then what is the district's, leverage on getting that repaired?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I have significant, sharing on kind of Nick's comments, I have really significant capacity issues, and what I mean by that is all the way down. We're talking, we'll just say 600 to keep the math simple, sales transactions a year. If you say certain percentage of those fail, that needs some level of, and that's absolute. I just am doing a remodel project with my right now, and so I don't think we don't have the plumbers and the capacity to do that volume of work every single year. And then more broadly, as a result of that, you're going to just see a litany of real estate transactions fall through the cracks as a result of that. So it has a significant downstream effect. But to your point, I'm also empathetic to I&I, and that's been something we've been looking at, going back to the Corolla study and so forth for quite some time. And so I think, kind of just, I'm open to additional kind of discussion, but I do have high level of skepticism in terms of our ability to, again, the capacity is incredibly important. Just as an aside, I get interviewed by the different jurisdictions about affordable housing, and I always explain to them, even if you remove your, regulation and how expensive it is, I still couldn't get people to build it. We don't have the plumbers to get it done, so what I think you're going to do is have a huge backlog and, a lot of downstream negative effects with that. So I'm supportive in some ways in concept, but I think in real world that the way it plays out, given our limiting variables, it becomes a nightmare for us if we don't think about it correctly.
Do you have a sense of the magnitude or what percent of the I&I is coming from the laterals? I guess overall, so if we were to, create a pie chart or whatever,
Based on that Corolla study, that was about 10 years ago, it was most of it. And I think it's just because the laterals make up by footage so much of the collection system. And it's not a district asset, and so we have limited control over it. The admin code does basically say that you cannot have your lateral taking on water into the district system. So if we find that, we actually do enforce that and tell people, hey, you got to fix this, right? If we'll TV our main line and see that a lateral's just dumping water into it, we'll have them fix it. But Corolla basically estimated that it was most of it. They isolated some. They broke all of our sewer basins into sub-basins, and I think the worst one in their report was what they called TK2A. So this is a section of the Tahoe Keys where the laterals, some of them are underwater, right? And so that was a bad area. There were some off of the upper Truckee basins had some bad areas, but it's a lot of it.
As well, just being able to better pinpoint where something like this might play out, I guess, or be more concerned than other places.
And we've done some of that too. So we've done after that study, we have continued on flow testing in our system. So we have some ideas on where the bad parts are, and we've done some inspection at night typically is where you do this, where you don't have high flows. You look at laterals and you can isolate these sources of I&I. It's a lot of work, takes time, but we could do more of that and kind of focus this. To give you an idea, one thing I forgot to mention is we did ask our local contractors who are performing these air tests, if they're seeing an increase in the failure rate of the air test. They said yes, over the last couple of years, these continue to kind of tick up. And right now, it's about 30% of the tests that they perform are failing for some reason. Not all of those require full replacement, but they require some kind of work. We're seeing more full replacements than we've seen in all the time that I've been here. Over the summer, we're seeing probably, 20 to 30 full replacements. And in the past, we really didn't. This would be like 1 to 2. So they're reaching that.
To think about because, once again, based on the number of sales that took place last year, that would mean approximately 280 would require work. based on that 30%.
Yeah, so it's a lot, and I think the only reason that we've been, I've been thinking about this for years and years because of that idea that even if there's, those same capacities for contractors or plumbers to do the work, this might hit all at the same time just as these things start failing more frequently. And so that was the question is, can we get ahead of this and be a little bit proactive in chipping away at it? Because that was always my worst case is like it just gets so bad to where they're just crumbling all at once.
But it sounds like the testing regime that's in place now is resulting in more and more being fully replaced. So we're getting more and more fully replaced. And I don't see the volume of like residential remodels and rebuilds going down. The number of transactions, I think that you see if it's 670 something, a lot of those come back then with the new owners for full-on remodel. They're going to be doing it anyway. You just don't gum up that transaction. You allow it to happen. It's more eyes wide open for the new owner, and kind of a cost that's then built into their remodel instead of, some of these buyers are trying to get out from under homes. Their margin is pretty thin, and now if you're sticking with another $30,000 on top of their transaction, it could totally, like Nick said, like torpedo a ton of transactions, and then you're not getting the remodels, and you're not getting anything fixed. So we have to be careful, I think, how we think through this and what we eventually achieve, and understand the drivers of what's going to give us maybe some, better replacement scheme. I don't know.
So for example, just to jump on that, for example, and this just happened, so, ongoing now, right? From the test to the contractor to the lining in the summer, given capacity issues, you're not doing that in 30 days, right? Like, it's just not going to happen. And so as a result of that, right, if you look at just typical buying windows, that just, it does create like a downstream kind of negative effect. One thing that'd be helpful for me is, we talked about before, is just as we weigh costs, like the cost of the district and the average ratepayer in terms of I&I, right? Because I think there's a lot of different things that go into it. There is a cost with this volume of I&I, right, to our treatment and to our pumping and to what the breakdown of our system quicker and everything we've talked about in terms of I&I over years. And so I think sitting here right now, I don't have a great sense of all that kind of previous conversations in my mind, but I think that's an important thing for me too, is that we continue this conversation, because it's not like the average ratepayer is getting out of this unscathed, right? It's just being socialized to everybody else. And so I don't necessarily love that either, right? And so I'm really on the fence on this one. I think there's other people. So it's not a ton of feedback, which is thought and consideration now.
And there's the same from us in ops too. And we were kind of on the fence about the whole situation. So.
I guess for me, again, if we have a better notion of kind of where these problematic I&I areas are, specifically laterals, then, why can't we present a zoning map showing where these areas are? Maybe have some outreach to suggest that, hey, you may want to consider taking a look at your sewer line in terms of, not only I&I, but, basically they don't want to, contaminate the soil and whatever around it. So I guess for me, maybe there's a voluntary approach to this, to where it's more of just outreach and letting people know, this is a good idea, and you might want to think about doing it. I don't know. Maybe I'm heading in that direction. So, I guess I'm supporting you moving forward, but maybe thinking of it as a way to not really burden a transaction necessarily. That's even possible thought through and outside of the box kind of approach.
It's an option. The one thing to say or to understand is the district actually has been kind of ramping up on our efforts to address I&I, because it's quite expensive to treat it, but it's really also to the plant capacity during these storm events. It's a concern of actually we've been on the edge of violation on some of these big events, and all of that is I&I. So it's like when we have these, especially the rain on snow type stuff, there's so much water, millions of gallons a day coming into the plant. So that's why the district has been investing, actually being more aggressive in addressing I&I. So we could definitely isolate and try to find these areas that are bad, but we may want to be more forceful on actually, you know, requiring people who have leaking laterals to get those fixed. And the admin code's kind of structured that way. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, it actually, if you talk to the operations side, that it actually is a real concern, especially for the plant operators.
When we discussed an also too about potentially asking these other agencies around the lake what that increase was from implementing this program. Like, how many more fixes did they get out of it? Not to say that we're going to be exactly the same as North Lake, but we should get a relative idea of what that increased flux was of new laterals to the customer. So,
Is that a similar issue with the INI and I guess their program to check the laterals? Is that kind of what their programs were as well? Or?
I think so. Yeah, that was really the thing. And what's interesting is on the north side, what's actually driving all of these agencies having the same policy is the Tahoe Truckee Sanitation Agency. So over there, all of these water agencies maintain collection systems, but all of the collection systems are connected to TTSA for treatment. So TTSA basically has super strict requirements for all of their clients on the INI coming in. That's what's really driving it. Is what I got from them is that TTSA came in and told them that they have to get their flows down. So this is how they all decided to do it. So same thing over there. They're seeing that the laterals are kind of the missing link, right? The district doesn't really have a ton of control over them as far as our projects, but they're a big source of INI.
I do have to say, though, if you would have added, when I bought a house in 2009, if you would have added $20,000, I couldn't have bought that house. And that's just real for a lot of people, right? And the thing is, it's going to hit, like, now I could do it. Now I did it by choice, right? But most of the time people can't, and so it's going to hit the poorest people.
and we had discussed that too, maybe like fluctuating the buy, like say you get approved for $450,000, it's a $20,000 thing that comes across, the seller says, okay, I'll just sell it to you for $420 and take that into the loan consideration. But again, that's all logistics and not necessarily always achievable. So, but yeah, I agree. That was another thing that came out.
Transactions and people trying to get on the lower rung the most.
Yeah. And they may, I mean, to the other side of it, though, it discloses something that may not be disclosed, right? Like, this is not something that's covered in a typical home inspection. Yeah.
Having it as a disclosure is one thing, but actually requiring and saying, we're going to, now that we know, are going to do a service disconnection, it puts us in an awkward position, but it wouldn't have a financial implication. It would be more of a disclosure and awareness for I mean, that's what we would have to figure out, right? Because once we know and it's in violation, we probably are obligated to do something.
Well, that's an idea, though, because we could talk about that. That may not be a bad idea to require the air test, which is relatively cheap. Then the buyer knows what they're getting into. They can negotiate if they want to, and maybe we back off a little bit on the requirements. That may be a good middle ground to kind of, find these things, and then the district's aware of them, but we can be reasonable in how we get it taken care of.
Yeah, I like the idea of that. I mean, I think, not to keep this going on, because I think there's been a lot of, things kind of thrown in the pot. And so, yeah, I think, it's an interesting discussion point, and there's a lot to be excited about with it, in addition to the kind of the potential pitfalls as well. And so, yeah, I would love to keep this conversation going, grab some, as you're looking at these other agencies, how to improve cost, those various other variables, and then, taking it from there.
Are you getting the direction you need?
Yes, yeah.
Hearing is try to limit the burden on the transaction. I think there's a better way to target where these issues are, and maybe focus on those areas. I'm not missing anything else. So I think the direction is move forward, but try not to.
And I think that's why Joel and I wanted you all to hear this, because it was there's a lot to.
There's a lot for two of us to.
Well, it's just looking at, TRPA and how they look at BMPs and a BMP cert, for example, right? From when I first moved to the basin to now, before you used to get letters in the mail, one, that wasn't effective, and two, was a public relations nightmare, right? But now if you go in for any permit, you come in and do your BMPs. And so, I mean, Nick knows better than anyone, but the level of compliance has continued to increase year over year with carrot over stick, which was both good for the community cost in the initial, and I would say for TRSP's reputation in the community as well, to not be the one smacking people with the stick. And so we want to be thoughtful of that as well.
Yeah, thank you. This was super helpful feedback, and this is why I wanted to talk to the board about it. This is a big one. It would be a big change for the district, and we were envisioning like a 1 to 2 year rollout on this. So this is just the very start of it. But yeah, thank you for the feedback. This is very helpful. I think we'll come back to you with some new ideas. We'll look at the cost of the I&I too, and kind of revisit the impact of that on the district.
What's the return on investment? That'd be good to know. Kind of.
One other last quick question. So if I, did a remodel now and I sold in 4 years, I'm still good because it's within that 10-year window, or is it?
Correct. Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm going to die in this house, right? So, like, you can visit me when I'm old, I promise you.
Yeah, good for 10 years anytime you get certified.
Well, I think maybe that's more coming from the standpoint of like how much has been done because of remodels in the recent time of getting rid of that concrete and that asbestos concrete. You know what I mean? Like understanding that maybe some of these are 100-year laterals now, and what percentage out there has been handled, and how impactful this could be to our customers.
And we know some of that. For remodel permits, we issue about, I think we've been doing like 20 to 40 a year, somewhere in there. So it's a smaller amount than like the properties that sell, but it's been fairly steady. The new builds have been declining. We used to do far more of those, but the remodels are pretty steady.
There'd be a lot more remodels with the price per square foot to build in there, but
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, like just going forward,
Building potential
for all that, exactly. Well, I know, really interesting conversation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, moving on to. Are there any more staff or attorney reports?
There's a couple of.
Okay.
I just wanted to stand up, please, Nick. This is Nick Martinelli. He is one of our new engineering inspector level 2. He is coming from a long career in the water wastewater industry. He came from the city of Sacramento, just moved up here. Not really buying a house yet, so we'll see if he's our first victim of this.
Can you come up and introduce yourself? And maybe
come on up. Yeah, I'm going to step away.
Let's see if I get this right. Hello, Mr. President and members of the board. My name is Nick Martinelli. This is my second week of work, so it's been a pleasure to be here. A bit of a whirlwind moving the family up, but also very, very nice to be here, and I appreciate it very much.
Great. Yeah, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then Mark has an introduction as well.
I'll piggyback on this one. So this is our summer intern, Emma Flo. So she's coming to us as a rising junior? Junior. Santa Clara University studying civil engineering. And she has a lot of great experience developing water filtration systems for rural schools in Kenya. And if you remember the 3D model that we had of the plant, that was Emmy's senior project at Tahoe.
Can you come up to the podium and introduce yourself, talk a little bit about where you're going? Welcome to the real world.
Hi, I'm Emmy. Like Mark said, I'm a junior at Santa Clara University studying civil engineering. I'm really excited for this opportunity and to work with this great team of engineers. So thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Any more introductions? All right. Okay, so that's it on staff and attorney reports. We got anything? No? Okay. Moving on to item 10, general manager report.
And nothing further from me. Just want to point out, though, the future meetings on here. It says the next board meeting is 7/2, but that meeting is not going to take place, so the next one will be 7/16. Yeah.
All right. Good. Okay. Item 11, there's listed in the agenda of the notice of past and future meetings and events. I think I'm going to adjourn the meeting now and go into closed session.